cold morning fog rolled over the dump like a thick gray blanket, swallowing the broken silhouettes of rusted cars and shattered appliances. The air smelled of smoke, metal, and forgotten lives. Yet 12-year-old Liam moved through it as if it were ordinary, because for him, it was. His fingers were numb, but he kept digging. A torn glove covered one hand, the other was bare, scraped from weeks of scavenging. He knew exactly what he was searching for: copper wires, aluminum cans, anything he could trade later for a few coins. Enough for bread, maybe enough for a pair of socks if he was lucky. He paused, hearing footsteps. Not the usual footsteps of other scavengers, these were slow, heavy, uncertain. He ducked behind a mountain of broken televisions, peering through the cracks. That's when he saw them. Two men in perfectly pressed suits, shoes far too shiny for this place, were stumbling across the trash, sweating nervously. They whispered sharply to each other, one glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. Liam felt a twist in his stomach. People like them never came here. And if they did, it wasn't for anything good. He pressed lower, holding his breath as one man kicked open a garbage bag and the other shoved aside a cracked refrigerator door. They were looking for something important. Liam knew danger. He felt it the way animals feel storms. He started inching backward when a familiar rumble approached, deep tires crushing the gravel outside the dump. A black SUV. Sleek, spotless, completely out of place among the ruins. The vehicle stopped, its tinted window lowered smoothly. Liam swallowed hard. He recognized him. Alexander Hayes, one of the richest men in the city. A man whose face appeared on newspapers, whose voice echoed on television during charity events. What was he doing here? Alexander's cold, sharp eyes scanned the dump like a hawk studying the ground. Liam's pulse jumped. He could stay silent, pretend he saw nothing, or he could speak. His father once told him, "If something feels wrong, son, say it." His father, who vanished years ago. Liam stepped forward, his heart pounding as he approached the SUV. Alexander saw him, expression unreadable. "What are you doing out here, boy?" Liam pointed toward the dirt path where the suited men disappeared. He barely managed to form the words. "Sir, they're at the dump." He didn't expect what happened next. The sudden seriousness in the billionaire's eyes, the way his body stiffened, the intensity of his stare. "What did you see?" Alexander asked, his voice low, urgent. Liam took a shaky breath. And in that moment, cold, frightened, and standing in the middle of a wasteland, his life began to change forever. Alexander didn't waste a second. The SUV door swung open, and he stepped out, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the dirt. His presence cut through the chaos of the dump, tall, controlled, radiating the kind of authority that made people move aside without a word. "Show me where," he said. Liam nodded quickly and started walking, weaving through narrow paths carved by years of scavengers. Alexander followed close behind, his stride long and purposeful despite the uneven terrain. The stench of rotting waste made him wince, but he didn't complain. His eyes stayed sharp, alert. They passed towers of rusted metal, sagging mattresses, and shattered glass that glittered under the weak morning sun. Liam moved lightly, used to avoiding dangerous spots, places where the ground could collapse or jagged steel could slice a leg open. Alexander noticed the boy's careful steps, the confidence in his movements. "You've been here before," Alexander murmured. Liam shrugged. "Every day." At the back edge of the dump, behind a collapsed fence, Liam slowed down. He lifted his hand, signaling for Alexander to stop. The billionaire crouched beside him, surprised at how instinctively he obeyed the boy's quick, silent commands. "There," Liam whispered. They peered over a mound of tires. The two suited men were still there, but their actions were more desperate now. One man was elbow-deep inside a broken refrigerator, grunting as he pulled out a sealed metal box. The other scanned the area nervously. Alexander inhaled sharply. He knew those men. Ex-employees, the ones he'd fired after discovering irregularities in financial reports. The ones who vanished right after the investigation began. The man holding the box cracked it open slightly, revealing a small locked briefcase inside, wrapped in dirty cloth. Liam watched Alexander's face shift from surprise, to anger, to something colder. The men turned suddenly, one of them spotted the reflection of light off Alexander's watch. "It's him," one shouted. They bolted. Alexander rose instantly. "Stop." He yelled, but the men didn't look back. Without thinking, Liam darted forward, his feet moving with the speed of someone who had lived his whole life dodging danger. He leapt over a stack of wood, dodged a rusted bike frame, and chased one of the men down a narrow path between mountains of trash. Alexander stood frozen for a moment, stunned by the boy's fearlessness. Then he sprinted after them. Liam jumped, grabbing the man's coat. The man slipped, stumbling over a pile of tangled wire. The briefcase flew from his hands and skidded across the dirt. The man scrambled up and ran, leaving the briefcase behind. Breathless, Liam picked it up. His arms shook under its weight, but he held it firmly. Alexander arrived seconds later, panting harder than he wanted to admit. He stared at the boy, this small, fragile-looking kid holding the key to a conspiracy that had nearly destroyed him. Liam extended the briefcase silently. "They dropped it," he said, chest rising and falling with each breath. Alexander took it gently, his hands trembling slightly. In Liam's eyes, he saw fear, courage, and something else. Potential. "Come with me," Alexander said quietly. "You've just saved more than you know." Alexander led Liam back to the SUV, carefully balancing the heavy briefcase on his lap. The vehicle smelled faintly of leather and citrus polish, a stark contrast to the rancid stench of the dump. He opened the briefcase slowly, as if expecting a trap. Inside were neatly stacked documents, financial reports, and photographs. The symbols and numbers were instantly recognizable to Alexander, proof of a scheme designed to frame him for fraud, a plot he had suspected but never had evidence to confirm. He leaned back in his seat, staring at the papers with a mix of relief and anger. This case wasn't just about money, it was about reputation, trust, and betrayal. People had been plotting against him for months, and only a handful of insiders knew the truth. But now, thanks to a poor boy who should have been invisible in the world, the key evidence was safely in his hands. He turned toward Liam, who stood hesitantly by the door, his face pale from the exertion of the chase. Alexander's gaze softened, the steely edge giving way to something almost paternal. "You did very well," he said quietly. "Do you understand what you've just done?" Liam shook his head. I don't know. I just ran." His words were small, humble, but Alexander recognized the courage behind them. Alexander studied him for a moment. This boy had skill, instinct, and fearlessness, qualities rare even among adults, let alone a 12-year-old who had survived life on the streets. He realized that Liam was more than a child in need, he was a partner of fate, someone who had changed the course of Alexander's life in mere minutes. "Where do you live?" Alexander asked suddenly, his voice firm but gentle. Liam's eyes dropped to the floor. "Nowhere. I sleep, wherever I can." His words hung in the air, raw and unsettling. Alexander's jaw tightened, not in anger at the boy, but at the harshness of the world that had allowed a child to grow up this way. "Get in," Alexander said finally, opening the SUV door wider. Liam froze, uncertainty and awe battling in his chest. Alexander repeated it, more insistently, yet softer this time, "You're coming with me. I'll keep you safe." Liam hesitated, glancing back at the distant, gray horizon of the dump, the only world he had ever known. Then, slowly, he climbed in, feeling a strange mixture of fear and relief. For the first time in his young life, someone had offered him protection, care, and trust, not because he had something to give, but because of who he was. As the SUV pulled away, kicking up dust behind it, Liam looked out at the fading piles of garbage and broken metal. His stomach twisted with excitement and uncertainty. He didn't know what awaited him, but he sensed, deep down, that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. Alexander, driving in silence, kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was already racing. He had survived countless betrayals, faced enemies who would kill without hesitation, but the presence of this boy, small and seemingly fragile, stirred something long dormant inside him, hope. And for both of them, the journey was only beginning. Alexander's mansion loomed ahead, massive and imposing, yet somehow inviting in its understated elegance. Liam's eyes widened as the SUV rolled up the long driveway lined with sculpted hedges and marble statues. He had never seen anything like this before, houses on TV, maybe, or in magazines, but never in reality. The sheer scale of it made his chest tighten, a mix of awe and fear bubbling inside him. The front doors opened with a soft chime as Alexander strode in first, his posture rigid but commanding. Liam hesitated at the threshold, taking in the grand foyer, polished marble floors that reflected the crystal chandelier above, walls adorned with priceless artwork, and the subtle hum of the household staff moving silently like shadows. The smell was foreign, fresh wood, faint perfume, and something clean that made him think of home, though he had never really had one. A butler appeared from the left wing, eyes wide but disciplined. "Sir, a visitor. This boy is my guest," Alexander said firmly, his voice carrying authority that left no room for questions. "Make sure he has everything he needs." Liam followed Alexander through corridors that seemed endless, his feet echoing softly against the stone floors. He was given a room, a small but cozy space with soft blankets, a bed that didn't sag, and a window overlooking the sprawling gardens. He hesitated at the door, unsure if he was allowed to touch anything, then sank onto the bed, overwhelmed. Dinner came shortly after. A steaming plate of food appeared in front of him, arranged neatly on fine china. Liam stared at it, his stomach twisting in disbelief. The scent of roasted meat, fresh vegetables, and warm bread made his mouth water. He picked up the fork hesitantly, as if afraid it might vanish if he used it. Alexander watched him from across the table, silent for a moment, then spoke. "You're brave," Alexander said, his voice low. "And smart. I want to help you. But I need to know, who taught you to move like that?" Liam's fork hovered over the plate, then he lowered it slowly. "My father, before he disappeared," he whispered. His voice trembled, barely audible, carrying the weight of years he had spent surviving alone. Alexander's expression hardened, though softened at the same time. He remembered that name. Daniel Ward, once his closest friend, now a man lost to the world, or so he had believed. The meal continued in quiet reflection. Liam ate slowly, savoring the warmth and comfort, something he hadn't experienced in years. Alexander didn't pressure him, only observed, noticing the faint tremor in the boy's hands, the way he lingered over the food as if afraid it would disappear. Afterward, Alexander escorted him to the study, a room filled with books, maps, and the faint hum of technology. "Rest now," he said softly. "You've earned it. Tomorrow, we start preparing." Liam climbed into the bed, pulling the blankets tightly around himself, feeling something strange and foreign, safety. For the first time, he didn't feel like he had to constantly look over his shoulder, didn't feel the cold gnawing at his skin, didn't feel the emptiness in his stomach. Alexander left the room quietly, standing at the door for a moment. He looked at the boy sleeping fitfully, dreaming perhaps of a world he had never known. His mind raced with plans, protection, training, investigation. But amid the strategies and calculations, one thought stayed with him: this boy was special. He was the key not only to exposing the truth but perhaps to finding someone long lost. For Liam, it was the beginning of a new life. For Alexander, it was a reminder that sometimes, the smallest people could change the largest destinies. And neither of them would ever be the same again. Late that night, the mansion was quiet, but Alexander's mind was anything but. He sat alone in his private study, the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating stacks of documents and old photographs spread across the mahogany table. The mansion's silence was a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts raging in his head. His eyes fell on a yellowed newspaper clipping, one he had kept for years. The photograph showed a younger man, smiling, arm around a boy, Daniel Ward, Liam's father. The memories came rushing back, their laughter during late-night work sessions, the plans they had made for the future, the betrayal that had ripped everything apart. For years, Alexander had hunted leads, chased shadows, and hoped against hope that Daniel was still alive. Now, staring at the boy who had just saved him, Alexander whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "Daniel, your son found me." The briefcase from the dump sat unopened on the side, still radiating a sense of danger. He knew this was only the beginning. The men who had tried to steal it weren't amateurs, they were part of something bigger, a conspiracy that had targeted him and now threatened the boy he had just taken under his protection. Suddenly, the phone on his desk rang, breaking the silence. Alexander picked it up cautiously, the shadow of a frown crossing his face. The voice on the other end was distorted, malicious, almost unrecognizable. "Return the briefcase, or the boy disappears like his father," the voice hissed. Alexander's hand tightened around the receiver, knuckles whitening. His heart pounded, not with fear for himself, but for the boy who had unwittingly stepped into a world of danger far beyond his years. He hung up and stared at the wall, thinking through his options. Security measures, escape routes, counter plans, they all raced through his mind, but nothing could fully erase the sense of dread. Liam had shown courage that few adults could muster, but he was still just a child. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. He had faced threats before, fought off enemies, and survived attempts on his life, but the stakes had changed. Now, it was personal. He turned his gaze back to the photograph of Daniel Ward. "I won't let this happen again," he whispered, voice steady with resolve. "I will protect him. And I will find you, Daniel. No matter what it takes." The mansion was quiet again, but in that silence, a new determination took root. Alexander knew that the briefcase, the boy, and the shadowy conspirators were all threads in a much larger web, and he would unravel it, piece by piece. Outside, the city slept, oblivious to the danger lurking just beyond its edges. But inside that grand study, a billionaire and a poor boy had begun a journey that would change both their lives forever. And neither of them would ever be the same again. The first battle had been won, but the war was just beginning.